Hi, welcome to Mastering Your Bernina with Pam from Time Flies Quilt and Sew. We want to help you along the journey of learning your Bernina. Stop this. Is working with the machine. So now Berninas are all pretty similar as to what buttons they have. The 790 is going to have a few more buttons than any of the others, but for purposes of this video, you'll get the hang of it. So first of all, when we are preparing to stitch, we want to make sure that our machine is cleaned and oiled. We also want to make sure that we have the proper presser foot for our sewing project, as well as the right stitch plate. We want to make sure our feed dogs are either raised or lowered, depending upon what we're doing, that we have the right needle and thread, and that we have the machine threaded correctly. We are going to go through all of that. Does that make sense?
Sure does.
Okay, so first of all, and I might have you tip this up a little bit. Well, I'm going to just take some Mettler thread and just leave it. I think it'll be fine. So I am using just a small spool. Yep. And the important thing when you're threading a machine is to make sure that you have tension on your hand. So I am holding the thread with my right hand, and I'm going to go behind and grab that first hook. Now I am simply going to follow the arrows as I go up and around to catch it on the take-up lever. And then I'll go behind the big hook here. And for those that have this kind of a pin and a plate, you do want to make sure that you are going behind both the pin and the plate of the machine. So now the needle threader can be tricky for people. And my words of advice when learning how to use the needle threader is to not play tug-of-war with your hands and the thread. You have to let the thread go through the needle. There's going to be a pin that I can't see very well go through the eye of the needle. It's very tiny. So what I do is I go halfway down. When you go halfway down, the presser foot comes down, and now you can't keep tugging on that thread. The tension discs are holding the thread in place. So I wrap it around the rocket like this, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see that. So I'm going to wrap around the rocket, and then once I bring that metal piece around, I go in and I make a little spin like that. And now I'm not going to play tug-of-war. I'm going to make sure that I don't have tension on that thread, so I get that loop. And then I can pull it through, and I'm going to cut on the thread cutter. When you use the thread cutter, the thread is at the right length for you to start sewing. It's not too long. We don't have to hold the thread. We're not going to bring up the bobbin thread when we start sewing. And when you use the scissors on your machine, which is right here on the frame, that is going to cut your thread to the exact length for it to begin again. So using the thread cutter on the side is when you're threading your needle, or using the scissors is going to make your thread the perfect size for your projects. Okay. All right. So next we're going to talk about that's basically how you thread the machine. The next thing that we're going to talk about is your stitch plate. So To remove the stitch plate, there is a bullseye in the upper right-hand corner. I'm going to push down on that with my thumb. And then to remove the stitch plate, I am going to use both thumbs to lift up and to take it out. The 7 series has 3 hooks on the back, or clips, that allow the thread cut or the stitch plate to be placed into the machine. The 8 series has 2 clips. So that's how I know the difference between the 7 and the 8. This is the zigzag or the 9mm stitch plate. And the single hole stitch plate has an orange dot on it. When you are going into the machine, into settings, we'll go into, and you'll find the settings button on the 790 on the outside. If you have a 4 series or a 5 series, it'll be on the bottom. You'll hit the home button and you'll see it there. So we'll go in, and where, you know what, that's not right. Clip. So the stitch plate setting is right here on the outside of the machine. The 9mm is selected. This is the single hole stitch plate, and you'll use that in certain situations for embroidery and for piecing for sure. But make sure that you have the right stitch plate selected. In order to insert the stitch plate, you angle it down on the left-hand side and you push down, and that's all that there is to it. All right, starting the navigation on the left-hand side of the machine, at the very top we have our tension. The tension is something that you can change the default on, but you don't have to. I typically would not adjust the default on the machine. I would leave it as it is. And if you want to change it, you can see just by dragging or hitting plus or minus is a way for you to change your tension. If you want to get back to default, all you do is hit that middle bar and you're back to default. You know you've changed it when there is a yellow outline around that bar. Next is your needles. As you can see, there's many different kinds of needles that a person could put into this machine. And at first glance, you might think that these are all different or the same. At first glance, you might think that these are all the same, but they're not. The 1.0, the 1.6, the 2.0, that has to do with how far apart those needles are from one another. So depending upon your project, you just need to make sure that you're selecting the correct needle. Easy enough. My favorite feature is the needle minder. If you use the needle minder, you will always know what kind of needle you have in your machine. So according to the needle minder, this one has an embroidery needle in a size 70. I don't believe that that's true. Things don't always get changed over on our machines in the classroom. So there's many different kinds of needles that you can select, from universal to stretch. As you go through, you can see what it is, and then you can go ahead and select 80 universal, and it will be in there. So it's only as good as the user. You know, the machine will function whether you're using it or not. It's just a really handy tool. Now, most of the machines, you do have to tell it what foot you have in the machine. These feet have a little mirror up that goes up to the machine, and the machine is going to know what foot attachment you have by that. But on certain machines, you still have to tell it. So on this machine, I'm going to tell it I have a 1C. You can use this magnifying glass up in the front, upper right-hand corner, if you want to search for the 97D foot, for example. You don't have to keep scrolling through all of those numbers. So 1C. And the reason why all of these other ones come up is those are all of the other feet that start with the number 1 that would be acceptable in our combination that we have with the wide zigzag 9mm plate and the number 1. So you can see these are all, they all begin with a number 1. But we need to select, and you will get a green check mark when you have the right foot attached. So now this is now in yellow on the side of the machine because that is a change from what we had before. The pressure on the presser foot can be changed the same way as the tension. You can either plus or minus, and to get back to the default, you will hit the box, and 50 is the default. So you'll learn about pressure on the presser foot when you take more technique classes. You'll learn, especially if you're garment sewing, that a thinner fabric is going to take a higher pressure and a thicker fabric will take a lesser pressure. So you notice this kind of looks like deja vu. We saw it the same as we did when we hit the needle. You hit the needle, you get the same window screen. But on here, we're looking at the stitch plate. So when I touch the stitch plate, now you're looking more down here. So the course of this left-hand side really is from the start of the top of the thread going and working your way down to the bobbin. So the next one is the feed dogs, and you get a little video that show you where your feed dogs are, and that's how you raise and lower your feed dogs. For normal sewing, you wouldn't lower them. But if you're going to free motion quilt or do some embroidery, you will. The very last icon is the bobbin icon. And if you forget how to thread your bobbin, there's a little video that pops up. And don't forget that you can oftentimes scroll on these pages. There are many ways to personalize your sewing experience. So we're going to go into the personal settings button, which is the gears. You can think of gears because many phones have the gears, which is settings, and that's exactly what this is. And it's all touchscreen, which is really nice. So just to give you an orientation, the straight stitch and the zigzag, that is sewing. The hoop is embroidery. This is your personal settings. The I is for sensors, and the speaker is obviously sound, and the sewing machine has to do with information about the machine. Okay, to begin, let's go into the sewing settings. There's lots of different ways that you can set up your machine. The first one is your tension icon. If you go into your tension icon, you can adjust that by touching the screen, plus or minus. I usually don't monkey with this. Or I should say, I usually don't deviate from what is the default. Not everybody's gonna know monkey. This icon is for the knot at the beginning of your sewing experience. When you start to sew, if you have the knot on, it is going to make a knot at the beginning of your stitch. Most quilters don't want a knot at the beginning of their stitch. Sometimes garment stitchers want to have a knot. Sometimes quilters do want a knot if they are appliquing and they want their applique stitches to start out by having a secure knot. That secure stitch is a way to make sure that your stitches don't come undone. The foot pedal. Many of our models of Berninas have a programmable foot pedal. In days of old, the foot pedal was just like this, which means if you rocked back on your foot pedal, you would do a needle up or a needle down. I call that a half stitch. To demonstrate the foot pedal, I will lower my foot, my presser foot, and by rocking my foot on the back of the foot pedal, I will have the needle go down. So needle down, needle up, all done with the foot pedal. Look, Mom, no hands. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and sew and demonstrate the running stitch with the foot pedal, the cutting, and the lifting. So I'll go ahead and start sewing. And when I stop, I'm going to rock my heel back. Those are the 6 running stitches, cut and lift. So what you see here are some normal stitches, and at the very end, 6 running stitches. And on the back is the nice little tail that's left. Okay, so now we'll go back into our settings, and I'll go ahead and demonstrate that you can turn the knot off if you want to just cut and lift. So it's completely up to you how you want to sew, what kind of a knot you would like. If you turn the knots completely off where they're not grayed out, unlike this, it won't work if it looks like this, but if you turn the knots completely off, then you have just your needle up or your needle down with your back kick. Sometimes I want that. So that's a setting that is on your foot pedal. Getting back into the buttons, the reverse button is located on the machine head right here. So you can program that to either be a regular back stitch or the back stepping. And the back stepping button right now is highlighted. So if you take a fancy stitch and you want to go to reverse, it will pierce each previous hole in the stitch. This button up here is called the program end button. So when you are making a program, maybe you are going to spell your name out in stitches using the alphabet, or maybe you're going to make some patterns, maybe duck, duck, train, or something like that. If you hit pattern end, which on the 790 is on the external part of your machine, same thing with the 770, the 5 series and the 4 series. 5s and 4s all have those as well. It's on the exterior of your machine, and it has the 3 dots at the bottom. Once you hit that, it will complete the pattern, and it will not cut and lift if you have those programmed. When you first go in, I believe that they're all grayed out like this. And notice you can choose a knot with a running stitch or just a cluster knot. Program end. Go back, the knot button on the outside of your machine can be programmed as well. Now, this is only on the 790. The other machines don't have the knot button on the outside of the frame. So you have your choice of using a cluster knot or a running stitch knot. That concludes all of the sewing stitches. We went through them all. Next, we're going to cover cleaning and oiling your machine. So the button on the right-hand side here, we're going to press and slide off the table. And we're going to press on the stitch plate, lift up with our thumbs to remove. We'll go ahead and remove the presser foot, and we will take out the needle. Some machines have a black screw, like the 5 series. The 7s and 8s have where you need the little hex screwdriver to remove your thread. Also, I want to note that when you take your thread off your machine, you want to clip at the top and then pull out where the needle is. And look at, there was a little piece of thread that was inside the machine. That's why you want to pull down so you have all the fibers going in one direction. I've not had that happen before. All right, so we're going to, first of all, take out our bobbin. Now I have the yellow bobbin in because we were doing embroidery. That's the high tension bobbin. So in order to remove the bobbin, you press where that circle is, a little concave circle, and that pops out the bobbin case. Show that again, it just pops right out. Okay, we'll set that aside. On the left, where my thumb is a clip that you can press, and that drops the front plate. The black box at the bottom of your bobbin case is your sensor that senses when you're getting low of thread. So we'll just go ahead and start dusting out all of this. Okay. And the metal hook assembly, we're going to just grab this spindle right here to pull it out. And angle it to take it out. And that is why Bernina sews so well. It's a vertical bobbin, so your stitches are pulled vertically when the stitches are made. And we'll go ahead and just dust this out. And in here, you can see that's the back of the hook assembly. When you service your machines or bring your machine in to be serviced by a Bernina technician, they know how to take this apart, and they do go behind this hook assembly. Notice in the middle, there is a silver dot that my Bernina tweezers are holding or touching, and there is a white dot at the bottom of the hook assembly. And there's little clips on either side of that. On the back side of the bobbin case is a magnet. In fact, it's a pretty strong magnet. It'll even hold my scissors. So it's pretty strong. The hole underneath it is what needs to be lined up with the white dot beneath it. The clips will fit on the outside here and here when it's lined up correctly. To oil the bobbin, you must only use Bernina oil. So make sure you get it from your Bernina dealer. It does come with the machine. And where we're going to put some oil is right on these felt pads. They're yellow in color. The pad is behind the black part of the hook assembly. And when your hook is spinning, the oil that we place will saturate that felt pad just through centrifugal force. So I'm going to put a drop on each circle. Just one drop is all that's needed. And then I will put one drop right around the 7 o'clock position. And that is right, you can see where that oil is. It is right here. That's right where you put it. And that's all you need to do. Do you have any questions, Molly?
No.
You would you would clean your bobbin case and add oil after every full bobbin that you use. So you don't have, over oiling isn't a necessary thing, but under oiling is probably a worse offender. So you want to make sure that you are putting in the oil. So you'll hear the click when it's in place. And also, if you were to look, and I don't know if you can really see with this, but the white dot would be showing. So you can see the white dot underneath here, just barely, but it's there, okay? Then you'll raise this part up and your bobbin is all set to go. Easy as pie. We'll put this back in. Now we're also going to clean the thread cutters, or thread catcher as Bernina likes to call them. So we are going to get down in here so you can see the thread catcher. All right, to clean the thread catcher or the thread cutter, we'll click on Machine, then Wrench, and then the broom. And this, if you read it step by step, it gives you the instructions for cleaning the thread catcher, also known as the thread cutter. So we have removed the presser foot and the needle. I just lowered the feed dogs. We removed the stitch plate. And now it says that we are going to move the thread catcher out. You want to hear that little sound. And then down here, I'm going to hit the scissors. And when I do, if you point the camera down here, you'll watch the thread catcher come out. There it is. So this unit right here that's underneath the stitch plate with the little hook, this is what cuts the thread. Okay, so I'm going to dust this out. It's pretty clean actually. Sometimes you'll see threads wrapped around that, especially when you're embroidering. And then now we are going to click on that, again, the hypertext link, and we're going to hit the scissors, and you can put the camera down here so we can watch it go back in. There it is.
Now that I did not know. That's great.
So now you know. So now we're going to put this in, again, left-hand side down first, press down, good to go. And I'm going to put the cone into the presser foot, and then with my finger, I'm just going to lower that bar. Make sure that the bar is snug on your machine. You don't want to be too wimpy about it. And then I'm going to insert the same needle. I just put in a new needle last night. So I also want to mention that when I'm inserting a needle, I make sure I unscrew as far as I can to make sure that I have the head of the needle as far up as it can go. Because I have run into situations where people say their thread cutter or their needle threader doesn't work, but they didn't have their needle all the way up. So it couldn't make that alignment. All right, so now we're going to go back into personal settings. I think there's one other button I didn't show in the button programming, and that was the needle hover, or the foot hover. The foot hover that is on this machine right now is completely off, and that's because the person using this used the knee lift. The knee lift is a really handy way to make your machine hover at precisely the time and the distance that you may want. If you want your machine presser foot to raise up a little bit, you might want to choose the second one. And if you want it to raise a lot, you would choose the highest one. Maybe you're working on something with a big pile, or maybe your machine doesn't have a knee lift. But I like to set mine to 0 and completely use my knee lift for the hover. Stitch selection. When you turn on your machine, you will see stitch number 1 as the automatic stitch that comes on, and it is set at 2.5 for the length. You can use your length knobs to adjust how big or small you might want them, and if you notice, the stitches are turning yellow. We are going to start on page 9 of the Sewing Mastery Workbook, and it is entitled Stitch Selection. When it's time to select a stitch, there's a couple of different ways to do that, of course. First of all, I'd like to draw your attention to the arrow. That is called the transition screen. So that allows it to open up so you don't have to scroll. You can see all of your choices right in front of you. And sometimes you might want a certain stitch that you know the number for. Now, all the quilting stitches start with 13. So these stitches go from 1 to 34 in the sewing stitches menu. And as you go down, there's more and more. If I wanted 1349, I could type in 1349, and there wasn't a 1349, it's 1329 then. Okay, let's try that again, 1329. Then that will come up automatically. So some stitches you might just automatically know what the number is. And then if you touch that again, you're back into the screen. So all of the 1300 stitches reside in the quilting folder. But going back to number 1, if you wanted to put in, well, let me see here. So we're going to talk about the transition screen in the stitch menu. So when you have your machine on, it will open up and it'll be at stitch number 1. Let's say I'm going to change my foot to a zipper foot, and I'm going to select my stitch. First of all, the transition screen is this little triangle. If you touch it either with your finger or with your stylus, it opens up fully, so you don't have to page through or scroll through the stitch selection. You can see everything that is available. Sometimes these arrows might be highlighted, which means there's even more pages. But here we have stitches 1 through 34 that are showing. If you happen to know what stitch number you want, whether this transition screen is open or not, you can hit the magnifying glass up above and type in 1329 if that's your favorite stitch, and hit the green accept button. It opens up, and all of the 1300 stitches are in the quilt menu. So if we were to look in that quilt menu, 1329 is the commonly used blanket stitch. And down here you can see there's 4 pages to scroll through unless we open up the transition window. Now there's only 2. So we have 1324, 1397, and just 1 on that next page, 1398. So that is the example of the transition window. Now we'll go back to stitch number 1, and to show you what it's like to change your foot attachment, what I'll do here is take out my foot attachment 1C, and I'm going to insert the dual feed foot 4D, which is the zipper foot. Notice where the metal part is in the middle. The needle would hit it if we don't move it over. So we're going to apply that foot attachment, bring down the dual feed, and I just basically reach down the back to bring it forward. When I am lifting up my dual feed foot, how I do that is I bring it down towards me so it's loose, and then I can just lift it up. You don't want to let it spring up, sort of like slamming the screen door. My mom always hollered at us for slamming the screen door, so you don't want to slam that up either. So now I have to go up at the top here and change my foot to 4D. Now, if you have a certain model machine like a 770, well, the presser foot recognition machines are the 880, the 790, the 590, and the 570 Quilters Edition. All the other ones are going to automatically recognize the presser foot. So this is unique to those machines. So now that I have that selected, I can close that out, and it changes the number to 4D. But you notice you have a red line right now in the center when it's at 0 millimeters up on top. It's right smack dab in the middle of that machine, and I am going to use the side arrows of the needle position. So I am going to, it depends on how I'm going to sew with this zipper foot, if I'm going to sew on the left or the right, but you can move the needle over, and you need to move it over until it's not red any longer. So 2, 3, 4, or 5, and you will be good to go. And you can do that to the right or to the left. So on some feet attachments, you do need to change that needle position. We're going to talk about the I menu. The I menu I like to refer to as the I wanna button. I want to do something with this stitch. So let's open it up to see what's in there. So what we have is we have a record button. Do you know what the record button is for? Maybe you are piecing, and you are piecing the same blocks over and over and over again. Maybe you're chain piecing, and those 2-inch blocks, you have 150 of them to stitch. Well, you can record your stitch for the first one, and your machine will stitch that many stitches over and over again. So you don't even have to turn it on. You can just set it to record over and over. I'll show an example of that at some point. This is how many times you would want your pattern to multiply. How many times do you want to do that duck, flower, train sequence? Do you want to have that sewn out one time or more than one time? These are the mirror image buttons. You can flip it like a mirror from the left to the right or to the right to the left. The mirror image, top to bottom, will flip it vertically. The balance button is used for balance stitches, of which I'll show you later. And this button is the elongation button. This one is the long stitch. Next, we're going to talk about the freehand system for the Bernina. It's a unique feature that many of our machines have. The freehand system inserts much like a handheld mixer, where you put it in and you can feel once it goes in. And it does, you do want to see an angle somewhat to your leg. Then when your leg touches the bar, it will raise and lower the presser foot. So right now, my presser foot is all the way down, and I have no hover on my machine because I plan to use the knee lift. And how high I raise it is also in your personal settings that we had talked about earlier. So this is as high as the knee lift will go with the personal settings that I have currently on this machine. The freehand system is really handy when you're making pivots like this, so go ahead and give it a try. And just note that the 435 does not come with the freehand system. It is an optional accessory. If you wanted to order one, see your Bernina dealer and the tech will help to install it. Page 14, Securing Stitches, Bernina Sewing Machine Workbook. Depending upon what you're sewing, there's 3 different examples of how to secure your stitch at the beginning and at the end of the stitch pattern. First of all, if you are a garment sewer, typically you're going to back stitch at the front, at the beginning of your stitching, and at the end of your stitching. So in order to do that, you'll lower your presser foot. There's 3 ways to lower your presser foot, either hitting the green button, the presser foot button, or using your knee lift. I'll show by hitting the green button. And the 5/8 inch seam allowance is covered up right now. Let me move it over just a smidge. There we go. So if I'm going to do the common garment sewing, I can simply press the back button to go forward and back. Sew my seam 5/8 inch, and when I get to the bottom, I can go back and then stop and cut my stitch there. So that's what I have, is right here and right here. So that's option number 1 for garment sewing. Now, if you are forgetting sometimes to use that back stitch button at the bottom, you can use stitch number 5 on your stitch menu. So when you start sewing with stitch number 5, it is going to go forward and back by itself. And then you notice there's the blinking reverse button on the screen. That is your reminder when you get to the bottom to just go ahead and touch that, and it will take the same amount of stitches and end automatically. So there's 2 choices. You can see what that looks like. Next, there is a quilter stitch. Quilter stitches start with the number 13. And this one is 1324. 1324 and check. Now, this is going to look pretty familiar to you. And when you see it, it is going to start sewing with a short running stitch. So go ahead and I'll step on my foot pedal. Now it's taking some really short stitches. Now it's going to the default, and that reverse button is going again to remind you to go ahead and do that, and it takes some running stitches and it stops automatically after doing so. So you don't have back stitches, but you do have some very tiny running stitches which are hard to release. So at the beginning and at the end. So there's your 3 securing stitches. We are going to talk about permanent reverse backstepping. If you want it to be permanent, the backstepping option is available. I don't know really why somebody would want to do that, but there will be certain situations in which you'll be glad that you know that this is an option. First of all, I am going to show in settings. We talked about this earlier, but we're going to turn on the reverse button to backstepping, and I want to show you what that does. So I'll start sewing the honeycomb pattern, and it will sew forward. And maybe I ran out of bobbin thread. Normally the machine will stop. But now if I want to go in reverse and backstepping, I can do up to 200 needle penetrations backwards. So that is an example of backstepping. It goes exactly into each hole in reverse. Now what page 15 is talking about is a permanent backstepping option. In order to get to that, well, first of all, let me go into the button program and turn off that backstepping, so not to confuse. If we go into the I wanna button or the information button, because I wanna go backwards, I can turn the backstepping option on. We'll close out of that and we start sewing. Now it is going in reverse. So there I sewed backwards. So as an example for mirror image and pattern repeat on page 16 of the Bernina Sewing Machine Workbook, we are going to pull up 1329 as the stitch. And if I go into the information and I can mirror image that. So I already had it turned already, but that's simply how you mirror image. Next, if you want to show a pattern repeat or do a pattern repeat, we will select number 401, which are the arrows. And if I want to do 4 times that pattern, I'll go ahead and sew it. And it will stop automatically when I get to that 4th one. Or is it doing more than that? There we go. And it stops automatically. Now if I wanted to flip the mirror image the other direction and do 4 more, I can sew it that way too. So maybe I want to have a nice pattern like this on my t-shirt or jacket. It will do that, and it stops automatically. There you go. So that is using the pattern repeat button and mirror image. We are on page 17 of the Bernina sewing machine workbook, pattern functions, pattern begin and end. I have attached a 20D foot to my machine, and we are going to select stitch number 413, which is hearts. So I want to show you what happens if we start sewing those hearts. And what I want to show is the white ball for the screen as to where the needle is actually penetrating. Can you see that in the upper right-hand corner of the screen? There we go. And I'm going to sew and stop in the middle of a heart program. I'm going to lift my presser foot and my needle. And if I wanted to move that, you'll see that the heart is going to continue right where it left off. I could have cut the thread too, but I didn't. And I can see where the white ball is, and that's where I'm going to cut it. So you can see the interruption in the stitching. Well, if you didn't want to interrupt your stitch, you can use pattern end. And on the 790, the pattern end button is on the outside of the machine, and I believe it is on all the other machines as well. And it's the triangle that has the 3 dots at the bottom. That stands for pattern end. So if I'm going to start sewing along, and I'm right in the middle of the stitch, I can hit the pattern end, and when it gets to the end, it's going to automatically stop. Okay, so that's the value of having pattern end. Now, let's say I'm going to show you one other example. Now, let's say we start over again, and I happen to be right in the middle. Here's the white dot. I'm right in the middle, and let's say for some reason I have to cut it there, and I move my presser foot down, and say if I wanted to start at the beginning, I would hit the pattern begin, and you can see what happened on screen here. It started right at the beginning. So if I wanted to get super fancy, I could say I want 3 hearts and start it at the begin and then end after those 3. I can go ahead and do that. So now it's starting at the beginning. You can see where the little dancing ball is. Well, actually it finished that third. Yeah. So let's start that again. Maybe we won't use that one. Did I only do 2? 1, 2.
But did you do that one up there? 1, 2, 3?
Here I have the heart stitches up, and let's say I want it to stitch out 4 times. I'll change it to 4, and after 4 times, it's going to automatically stop on its own. stops automatically. So the pattern end button you use if you don't know how many times you want it to sew. And I'm going to go ahead and just change this. It goes up to 9. And let's say I'm just going to watch it manually because I'm here anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and sew. And you can see the screen. And I could say, well, I'm going to go until the edge of this fabric. And when I think that I want it to end, I'm going to just hit pattern end. It's illuminated, and after that one pattern, it will stop. And so there I was able to go until I hit pattern end, and that light was illuminated. Notice how the light goes on? That's how you can tell if you have that engaged. So either you know how many times you want it, or when you don't, you hit the pattern end.